everyone, how are you today? So in this video, while I prep my fabrics to sew, I am going to be talking about the pad that we are going to be constructing today. We are going to be making today a pad that is referred to as the H pad or the H shape pad. They are, as I will demonstrate in a few moments, a pad that is in the shape of the capital letter H. These pads are made and well beloved because they are useful in the fact that they do not require any sort of snap or closure. The pad or liner, whichever you make, is fitted around the underwear, and then one side is folded over the other, and that is what makes the pad stay on your underwear. This is also a great pattern for donating. People that like to bulk sew and donate for charities, they will use a pattern similar to this sometimes because it is easy to sew, it comes together well, it is easier for people that are newer to cloth or that are in an area that's not so populated or doesn't have the resources that someone like you or I might have. Depending on how they're constructed, they could dry a little faster, and that's also a plus that could be beneficial for people that are making pads to donate. Because the pad doesn't have snaps on it, the pad is useful for things like biking. If you notice that you feel your snap on your pad when you're riding your bicycle, it's useful for exercising. If you're walking or running and you feel the snap on your pad, this pad could be a nice alternative. Some people are just really sensitive to the snaps on their pads, or they want to make pads that are a little more eco-friendly and don't include the plastic or the metal that a snap is. In this video, we are going to be somewhat modifying a cloth pad pattern to make the pattern for an H-shaped pad, but there are, to my knowledge, 3 companies that make their own pattern, so I will leave a couple of their patterns each in the description down below, so that if you want to try this pad out, but you don't want to make your own pattern, or you're a little nervous about making your own pattern, then that resource is available to you, and you can go and purchase their already made patterns for you. So this is an H-shaped liner that I made. I kind of made up the pattern on my own, and this is what came of it. As you can see, there are 2 sides to the pad and this strap in the middle. If you don't want to include this strap in your pattern, you could have the 2 halves and a ribbon combining them, or you can just have the strap like this. There's probably several options you could have for the strap here. This is how they work. So this is the top of the liner. This is the back of the liner. You take the pad or the liner, whichever one you're making, and the strap goes under the gusset of your underwear. You fold one side in and the other side in, and that closes the pad in your underwear, just like this. This is a liner, so we're going to be making a pad today. To make this pad, I'm going to be using the All Fluffed Up Joy pattern, a piece of cream flannel for the hidden core. I'm going to be using this Christmas lights pattern for the backer, and this Christmas window pattern for the front. And then I have some of this blue flannel for the core. I'm also going to be including a layer of hidden PUL. So this pad is probably going to be a little bit more complicated than a typical pad would be, in that I have both a hidden core and a hidden PUL layer. I'm going to walk you through everything. I'm going to show you what you would do if you didn't want to include these layers, if you just wanted to make a liner out of this, if you wanted to have PUL or fleece but not hidden. So we're going to discuss all of that for you today. So here I have just a piece of manila paper and a pen. What we are going to be making here is going to be the pattern for the strap that is going to hold the two sides of the pad together. You could simply trace the gusset of your underwear and do it that way, adding about 1/4 of an inch on either side. But the way I am going to do it today, to be a little bit more precise, is I'm going to put my tape measure about in the middle. And as you can see, it's measuring from the 3" to the 6". And then I'm going to wrap the edge over, and where the edge of my gusset is, I'm going to make a mental mark. So that's 1/4 of an inch there. So that means that for this particular pair of underwear, I need 3 inches plus 1/4 of an inch on either side in order for my pad to be able to wrap around and for the top to lay flat in the gusset of my underwear. So I'm just going to make a mark at either end. Now we have our mark for our gusset. I'm going to try and straighten that up a little bit. Okay, so we have our line for our gusset. The next thing that we need to decide is how wide do we want the strap to be. The wider your strap, you will get a little bit more coverage and the pad won't move as much. However, it won't make the pad as flexible. You might notice that your pad doesn't want to bend with your underwear because there's a little bit more material on the bottom. I'm going to make mine about 2½ inches. That seems to be a fairly nice size for this pair of underwear. I'm just kind of looking at the gusset and seeing what measurement might be good for this particular pair of underwear. So for this one, I would say about 2½. Anything bigger might make it crunch up or might make the pad crunch up. Anything smaller, it might move a lot. So I'm going to do 2½ inches. So basically all I'm doing here is I am marking at about the middle of the first line we made and marking it at about 2½ inches. Then I am putting a line at either end of the other 2 lines to make a rectangle so that we have a rectangle to work with. So now I have a 3½ by 2½ inch square. I'm going to cut this out. So now we have our 3½ by 2½ inch square. I'm going to fold it over on itself. And make sure that all of the edges are pretty much even so that we have an even rectangle. If it wasn't even, then I would trim it up, open it up, make sure that everything looks square. Or you could fold your paper in half to begin with and do your measurements in half, but for such a little piece of paper, I didn't think that that was necessary. Now you are going to take your pad pattern of choice. This is the base, or the part that includes the wings and the pad, and you are going to fold in the wings of the pad. I might seem like I'm being a little tedious here in folding in the wings, but you want to make sure that you're careful. That way you have a straight edge to work with, so take your time and fold them in neatly. I'm going to take a little piece of washi tape and I'm going to put the middle strap where I think that it would fit nicely on this pad. So I'm trying to put it evenly between the 2 flares, and then apply my little piece of washi tape. And so now you have your pad pattern put together with the strap pattern. So as you're going to see when I go to trace out my pad pattern, I am tracing it out on the fold of the fabric. So I'm folding the middle strap pattern in half. That way I have half of a pad pattern. If you wanted a full pattern to work with, then you would just go ahead and put another topper on the other side of the strap pattern so that you have two sides to the pattern and the strap in the middle, and you would have a full pattern to work with. If you're doing like me where you're tracing out the pattern on the fold of your fabric, just make sure that the fold in your strap is lining up with the fold in your fabric. And now all that we're going to do is we're just going to trace all the way around the pattern. What we're doing is we are not only marking out the pattern, but we are tracing out the line that we're going to be sewing on later. And because I like to have the line to sew on, I just flipped over the fabric and traced it out on the other side. If you're someone that doesn't need a sew line, then you could definitely just cut a 1/4 inch away from the line that you made on the other side of the fabric and just sew with your 1/4 inch seam allowance or whatever you want your seam allowance to be. But I like having the line, so I just flipped it over and traced it out on the other side. So as you can see now, I have both sides of my pad here. If you were not doing a hidden core, then you would just trace this out on your topper and do the same thing. Because I'm doing the hidden core, I'm tracing it out on the part of the pad that I want the core to be attached to. With your fabric scissors, you are going to cut around the pattern, however big of a seam allowance you want. I usually do about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. I don't measure it, I just eyeball it. I've got it trimmed with the seam allowance. Now you have a couple of different options for what you want to do for a core. Because this is a layer of flannel, you could always just omit a core and you could sew your topper and your backer on, and this would be your core because it would technically be 2 layers of flannel because you have this side and this side that are both going to be absorbent. You could have one side have multiple layers of absorbency and the other side have nothing. You could have it evenly distributed between the 2 sides. You could do 3 on one side and 2 on the other. It's completely up to you. It all kind of depends on how you want to construct your pad. I'm going to do 1 layer of flannel on either side. So to do that, I'm going to take my just core pattern that your pattern is going to come with, and I'm going to draw out and cut 1 for each side. So here are my 2 pieces of core. If you were not doing a hidden core, you would just attach them to your topper fabric. So I'm going to put 1 on one side and center it as best as I can, and 1 on the other side, again centering as best as I can. And then I'm going to pin all the way around to keep them where they are. If you wanted, you could use basting spray or washable non-toxic glue sticks. I just have pins, so I'm using pins. You could use clips if you have those. Now, my personal preference with a hidden core is to do a zigzag stitch along the edge of my core to affix it to my hidden core layer. If you were just sewing this onto your topper, then you could do a back stitch or whichever kind of stitch you prefer to put your core onto your topper. So to do that, I'm going to bring my threaded needle up from the core. So I came through the back of the fabric to the front of the fabric through the core, and I'm going to bring my needle back down through the hidden core layer to make a stitch. Then I'm going to bring my needle from the back to the front once more, about the length of a grain of rice away from my first stitch. Bring my thread up, and my needle goes back through the hole that I made in the hidden core layer. So I'm going to go and stitch all the way around both sides of my core to affix my core to my hidden core layer. You would do this on your topper if you were not doing a hidden core layer. I like the zigzag stitch because it makes the core a little less noticeable inside of the pad. It makes the edge of the core kind of flatten down into the hidden core layer. So I find that the most comfortable for me. So I'm going to go and sew that and then come back. Okay, so as you can see, I have done a little zigzag stitch all around the edge on both sides of our core. I was not particularly neat. I just tried to stay consistent. The purpose of this is to just adhere the cord either to your topper or the hidden core layer and to flatten out the edges a little bit, so you don't have to be particularly neat. So now we go on to the fun part. You're going to take your cotton or whatever you want your topper layer to be. If you have not sewn your core to your topper, then you're going to add it in here. So you're going to take your hidden core layer and put it on top of your topper. I like to just take a second and make sure that the placement is something that I'm probably going to like. And then I'm going to trim all the way around my pad here. So now we have our hidden core layer with our trace line facing up, and we have our topper fabric with the pretty side facing down towards the table. Your backer fabric goes with the pretty side facing up towards the pretty side of your topper. And again, we trim around the edge. As you can see, I wasn't particularly careful as I cut that out. None of the edges are nice and neat or even. The purpose of this is to just have everything in roundabout the correct shape that you want, because it's all going to be trimmed down once we finish our pad. You have either your hidden core with the trace line facing up or your topper fabric with the trace line facing up. The pretty side of your topper fabric is facing down and the pretty side of your backer fabric is facing up. Now here is where I'm going to add in the PUL layer. If you didn't want a hidden PUL layer, you wanted some sort of water resistant layer, but you didn't want it hidden, what you would do would be your backer fabric. You're going to cut out 1/2 of the entire pad. You're going to cut out 1/2, and then on whatever other layer you want to be the water resistant or waterproof, whether it's PUL, fleece, whatever you want, cut out the other half. So you would have half, in this case it would be half cotton and half PUL. You could have half flannel, half PUL, half knit, half fleece, whatever you want. This one would be traced and cut to the size that you want. You would make sure to cut them with about 1/4 to 1/2 inch longer here in the strap than you normally would, and you would use that 1/4 to 1/2 inch seam allowance to sew the two of them together and form them into one piece so that your back would look like this. I want the right to fold over the left so that when it's sitting in my underwear, this side is underneath this side like this. So I want this side to be folded over and then this side on top of it, which means that the water resistant layer needs to be on this side of my fabric. So it really helps, at least me, to fold it over and visualize so I know which side I for certain need to add my waterproof layer on if you're hiding it. You can also do this if you're fusing the two pieces together like I just showed you. So we need our water resistant part on the on this side, on the right side, or this is at least my right side, we need to add the PUL layer. Most people want the shiny side down. To me, I think that PUL is water resistant no matter which way you put it up, but for the sake of this video, we will do the shiny side down. That way it's the shiny side that is facing our core. I'm going to center the pad within that. This is also, as a little bit of a side note, really good for these pieces of PUL for someone like me who needs larger pads and can't really use smaller pads, to use up these scraps that are too small for any other pad for me to put in, because PUL likes to move, and it of course has that slippery side, so it's a little bit slipperier than anything else. I'm going to pin it. If you are someone who does not like to pin PUL, I would suggest trimming it down and clipping it. I am going to pin it and then trim it because I do not trust that I wouldn't cut it incorrectly, and something would end up too small if I didn't pin it and then cut it, but that's completely up to you. With PUL, it's perfectly fine if you pin it in the seam allowance. As you can see, I like to pin it as far to the edge of the seam allowance as I can, because once you're done sewing your pad, all of this is going to be cut off anyways. I will pin PUL about 1,000,000 times more than I will pin anything else, because as you're sewing it, you might notice that things kind of shift, and I feel like the more pins, the better, and it just makes me feel a little bit better. I do also cut my PUL the largest out of all of the layers, just in case there is any shifting. Then I have a little bit of extra wiggle room, but you can cut it to size if you want to. I'm just paranoid. So now we have arrived at the little middle part. You could just trim it right here and go ahead and sew it as is. I want as little bulk in the center here as possible, so I'm going to go ahead and flip my pad over and trim the PUL a little bit closer to where it needs to be, so there's not so much bulk in the middle here. The good thing about PUL is that having this bare edge and not finishing it is not going to be detrimental. It's not a cotton or a flannel that's going to fray in there, so having this exposed edge in your little middle part of it is going to be perfectly fine. Now we have on my left the hidden core. If you didn't have a hidden core, your core would be attached to your topper. That topper is facing the backer. We're going to call it the backer for this demonstration. This side's pad sandwich is the hidden core with the topper facing pretty side down to the backer and PUL facing shiny side down to the table. And that's what it looks like on the back, if that gives you a little bit more perspective. I am going to finish pinning all the way around the pad so that nothing moves on me. I have pinned all the way around. One other thing that I'm going to mention, and that I'm going to use clips to demonstrate, is if you have a fourth layer on one side like we have here, then I would suggest putting your turning hole on this side. The side with the less amount of fabric is going to turn out a little bit easier. I also would not suggest leaving it in the middle here. It would be really difficult to turn one half of the pad out and the other half of the pad out of this tiny hole. I would suggest leaving it, say, on this straighter edge here, because you're going to have an easier time pulling the entire pad out through this core rather than pulling out half and pulling out half. You can pull out the entire pad from this turning hole here instead of turning it out here, which would be a little more difficult. I am going to place 2 clips here to remind myself that that is my turning space. I might even put a couple of marks if I'm someone that helps visualize a little bit better. So we are going to start on one side of our hole, sew all the way around with a back stitch, come back to this side, and then stop our stitches. So to do a back stitch, you're going to come in about the length of a grain of rice away from where you want to start and pull your thread up from the back to the top. You're going to put your needle down from the top to the back and pull your threads through. I have a little short piece of thread here, so it's not going to go very far, but so again, to make your next stitch, you're going to go about the length of a grain of rice away from the back to the front, pull your thread up through, and then back through the last hole that you made. You want to make sure that your stitches are small and consistent. They don't have to be absolutely perfect, as long as they're small, consistent, and they're not going to be large enough to cause a hole anywhere. I'm going to go and sew all the way around, and then we will come back and I will show you how to turn it out. So my camera lost all of this footage, so this is going to be a couple of different videos pieced together. Here you can see I have I've done a back stitch all the way around, and the layers are now sewn together. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to clip our seam allowance. Here I'm demonstrating that you want to clip across any corners that you have. Make sure that you're not clipping any stitches, that'll make a hole in your pad, but if you have any sharp edges, just clip across those. Your turn hole, you're going to want to make sure you leave a little extra fabric. Don't cut it as close as you're going to cut all of your seam allowance. That way you have a little bit of fabric that'll turn in and you will be able to catch that, and you're not going to cause a hole in your pad. So with your seam allowance, you're just going to cut all the way around, cut kind of close, but not so close that when you're turning it out, you could cause a hole. I like to do just a couple of millimeters, not a whole lot of fabric around the pad. That'll cause some bulk and it'll cause your pad to look not as neat. So you do want to cut kind of close, but not too close. Here I'm demonstrating that you want to make sure that you're turning your pad out through the topper and the backer. So if you have any extra layers like I do, where you might have extra PUL or a hidden core, just make sure that you're turning your pad out through the topper and the backer layer. It doesn't matter how many layers you have in your pad, as long as it's being turned out through the topper and the backer, you're going to be perfectly fine. I like to crunch my pad up a little bit. I think that helps it turn out a little bit better. And then again, going through the topper and the backer, we're just going to go to the furthest end of our pad, and we're going to kind of tuck it in, see if we can maneuver it, push it in, whatever you can do. Be kind of gentle with it. Don't be too rough. You might tear your stitches, but the goal is to get the entire pad out through that hole so that you can then poke it out and top stitch around it. It can be a little bit difficult and you might have to do some wiggling and a little bit of tugging, but as long as you're gentle and easy with it, it'll all come out really, really easily. And then I just take a chopstick or whatever I have near me and use that to poke the corners out and make everything nice and smooth to top stitch. At this point, you could go and press your pad if you would like with an iron. That way everything's nice and flat. At this point, I usually just go around the edge with clips, but I think that using clips for the entire pad as I'm stitching might be a little heavy. So instead, what I'm going to do is, as I go around, I'm going to roll the fabric between my fingers to get everything out nice and flat. And then I'm going to clip as I go on the sections that I'm working on, so that I don't have a whole bunch of clips on here as I'm sewing it for my thread to get caught on or what have you. I'm going to go around the edge as close to the edge as I can with a back stitch, and then we will come back and discuss the final product. Okay, so here is the finished pad. One thing that I did want to note is that while I was sewing, I found the need to clip together one side as I was sewing the middle and the other side. I found that it was a little hard to not get my thread caught on clips or pins or this part of the pad, so I did find that it was beneficial if I just clipped together one side, sewed the pad, and it was a little less cumbersome to top stitch the pad that way. If you consider all of the fabric aside from the cotton that's on the other side of the PUL, This is 3 layers of flat cotton, 4 layers of flannel, and 1 layer of PUL. So this is a little bit on the heavier side, especially with the PUL. I think that I would trust this pad on a fairly heavy day. I am really excited to try it and see what I think. If you can see here, there is just a little bit of room on the edge of the pad from the side of the gusset, which I like. That means that the pad is going to fold over a little bit better than the first pattern that I had made. With that 1/4 inch on each side, if you can see, the pad folds over really nicely. It's not bunching up on the other side of the underwear. The underwear is not bunching up. It is laying flat and all of the ends meet up, which was the issue that I had with the pattern that I had just kind of thrown together. So I think that this is going to perform really well. I am really excited to give it a go and see kind of what I think. All of the links to everything is in the description box down below. There is the link to this part of the pad pattern that I used. This was the all fluffed up Joy pattern. I have the link for that in the description down below, as well as 4 links to 4 other wingless or H-shaped pads that you can use to make these. Some makers, like I mentioned in the beginning, have already made a pad pattern for this. I just wanted to show you how you could manipulate a pad pattern that you already have and like, or that you could have the measurements that you need to make the middle part. So even if you wanted to draft a whole new pattern, you kind of could see how to make the middle strap of the pad. I also wanted to show you that if you didn't want to use a pre-made pattern, or you didn't want to buy one, that you could use a pattern that you already like, or completely draft a whole new pattern. But just to give you an idea of how I have researched and decided that I prefer the middle portion of the pad to be, and my reasoning for that, so that you can go forward and do make pads that work for you. Okay, so that is it. I would love to hear what you think in the comments down below. Have you used a pad like this? Are you planning on sewing one? Are you intrigued now? I know that I certainly am. If you would like, I would love if you would hit the subscribe button down below. That means the absolute world to me. While you're down there, hit the like button. That helps YouTube to suggest this video to someone who might need it. Leave any comments or anything that you have down in the comments below. And as always, you enjoy the rest of your day, okay?